Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. In Cicero's On the Nature of the Gods, one of the main lines of criticism made from the Skeptic position, represented by Cotta, against the Epicurean position, represented by Velleius, is going to be that the Epicureans are wrongly engaging in what later on we call anthropomorphism. This is a term that comes into the philosophy of religion, not least because of one of the great admirers of Cicero, somebody who took a lot from this dialogue, David Hume, who has some of his characters in the dialogues concerning natural religion use that term. And the Epicureans are indeed committed to asserting that the gods are in shape or in form like human beings. And Cotta is going to say, on this topic, you are at no loss for arguments designed to prove the gods have the form of human beings. And he talks about three main arguments. So, first, because our minds possess a preconceived notion of such a character that when a person thinks of God, it is the human form that presents itself to him. And this ties in with the argument from common consent, saying, hey, listen, everybody has some shared conception of God. Look at all the people of the world. They all agree in this. The second one, which is quite interesting, is that the human form is the most beautiful. The divine form must also be the most beautiful. Since the human form is the best looking one, we could say, well, the gods must look like that as well, right? So it's kind of an aesthetic appeal, isn't it? The third one has to do with rationality or mind or intellect. They're going to use different terms for this. It's actually mens that is being used first. So he says, you say that no other shape or form is capable of being, like this, the abode of intelligence, domicilia mentis, right? So literally the house of the mind. So the Epicureans are saying this to assert that the gods are like us, but they're godlike, right? So there is a difference there. There's a number of counter-arguments that are going to be made against this position by Cotta. So we'll go through each of these in turn. And he's going to start by saying, listen, is there anybody so blind as not to see human shape has been assigned to the gods, either by deliberate contrivance of philosophers or by superstition, or the poets and painters and artificers? It's hard to represent gods in any other way, isn't it? It's, what are you going to do? Like paint a cloud or something? And then he goes on to say something much more interesting. Every animal would give preference to its own kind, and in fact does. So he says that, maybe we believe in our superior beauty, but you as a natural philosopher, this is, not going to be helpful. Do you suppose there's a single creature on land or in the sea that does not prefer an animal of its own species to any other? And, he's saying, what does a bull prefer? Does a bull desire to copulate with a female horse? No, it desires to copulate with a female cow, right? Something of its own species. And why? Because it finds that attractive. And we could go on and on. What about a snail? Does a snail say, that spider over there is looking pretty good?
No, it finds another snail. And they're all like that, right? So he says that, do you imagine an eagle or lion or dolphin thinks any shape more beautiful than its own? I mean, this is just sort of a natural instinct. So you can't use that for an argument. And then he goes on and says something even better about this. Suppose animals actually possessed reason, ratio, right? Do you think that they would each assign preeminence to their own species? So, if we could in fact have animals that did possess reason, and perhaps they do. I mean, they didn't think they did at the time, but maybe they do. Wouldn't they make arguments for why the dog is the most beautiful animal, or the monkey, or the crow, or pick whatever else you want? So, that's an interesting consideration there, isn't it? Another great argument here has to do with the gods being superlatively beautiful. And he talks about how it is that, we have people who are not all that beautiful, but then they have flaws, but they have a certain kind of charm, right? That's not going to work for the gods. He says, can we imagine any gods with a slight cast? Can we picture any of them with a mole, a snub nose, protruding ears, prominent brows, too large of a head? Or are they entirely free from personal blemishes? Now, here's where we're going to get into trouble. He says, suppose we grant that. Are we also able to say they are exactly alike? If they're all supremely beautiful, and to be beautiful is actually to lack any sort of imperfection, then aren't they all the same? He says, if we don't grant that, then there's going to be degrees of beauty. Some gods would be more beautiful than others, but we want to say they're all superlatively beautiful. So if they are all alike, he says, then the academic school must have a large following in heaven, because if there's no difference between one god and another, among the gods, knowledge and perception must be impossible. They literally can't tell each other apart from each other. So that's kind of an absurd consequence. We don't want to believe in that, right? So this is attacking the beauty part, saying that the idea is kind of incoherent. Going back to the first one, the preconceived notions, he's going to say, okay, if we're thinking about Romans, and I suppose we could include Greeks in this as well, then do we, have anybody who doesn't look just like, a human being? Well, no, but what about the Egyptians? What about the Scythians? What about other people, right? Don't we see that they actually think that there are gods who have non-human shapes? He talks about the Syrians, any of the other races that are different. And so, we can't really say that everybody thinks that God has human shape. That's not actually the case. What about the heavenly bodies? Some people think those are divine. Some philosophers do. Some peoples do, those who are engaging in astrology. And now, what does he mean by the heavenly bodies having intelligence? Well, they observe regular courses. The moon goes around once a month. That's why it's a month. The sun once a year. It doesn't say, well, I think I'll take it easy this time. It's going to take me 2 years to get around. All the planets have their regular rotations. And, he says, couldn't you say that the sun or the world or some kind of other intelligence is divine? And he says, have you ever seen anything like the sun or the moon or the 5 planets? The sun limiting his motion by the 2 extreme points, right? So these seem to be intelligent. And he says, what, Epicurus, are you going to deny the existence of the sun, moon, and planets? You've never actually seen God himself. You're like somebody who's living inland who denies that there is an ocean. So, that's kind of an interesting argument there. I mean, probably not that convincing at this point in time, because we don't believe, first of all, we don't think that the sun rotates around the earth, but, we don't necessarily ascribe intelligence to things that are moving by, other forces and factors. So we'll set that one aside for a bit. He also has another really interesting argument that he's going to make, which is that, listen, are we getting things right in saying that the gods have human form? If the gods existed before us, and we actually share the same form, wouldn't it be more correct to say that human beings have a divine form, a form like the divine, rather than the gods having a form like ours? Because, if the gods were what we were modeled on or what was there first, they are the archetype for that. And then he's got another great question that he's going to ask about us human beings and the gods. So let's say the gods actually do have the human form. Well, how much of it do they have? And what do they do with it? He says, you don't perceive what a number of things you are going to agree to if we consent that men and gods have exactly the same form. You will have to assign to God the same physical exercises, right? The same cultus and the same care, curatio, of the person or the body as are proper to human beings. So gods are going to walk, run, bend over, lie down, sit, hold things in their hand, converse, and make speeches. And does that actually make sense? To say that the gods are doing it? I mean, the poets say things like that, but they don't say it about everything, So even that isn't completely consistent. The gods are also going to have sex, too. He says that, if they're going to have male and female characteristics, you can see what the consequence of that is going to be. And, the ancient Greeks did think that the gods had sex with each other. That's how they made new gods. But does this really make sense if we're talking about the divine in a philosophical way? And he's going to go on and pursue this a little bit further and introduce additional absurdities. So he says, if you're going to say that rational intelligence can exist only in human form, why don't we go a little bit further with that? Why do we say it's just the outward form? Why don't we also say that rational intelligence will exist in a mortal being? One who's been born, grown up, educated, consists of a soul and body, liable to decay and disease, that it can only exist in a mortal human being. If we want to say that that's where we see rational intelligence existing, how is that going to pertain to the gods? I mean, you say the gods are immortal, and they don't actually have body. They've got a semblance of body. That's a little confusing. We don't actually know what that means. So why don't we pursue this line of reasoning? What he's doing is he's saying, let's make your argument stronger, and then we see how it fails. And so he goes on and he's making fun of him here. He's like, your God has not merely one finger more than he wants, but also a head, a neck, spine, sides, belly, back, flanks, hand, feet, thighs, legs. What is he going to do with all of these things? And then he says, life actually depends on the brain, the heart, the lungs, the liver. Is your God going to have all of these organs and guts and stuff like that as well? Or is your God sort of like an idealization of human being? It doesn't have all that gross stuff inside because it doesn't have a proper body. But if that's the case, then this line of thinking that only the human shape can be rational, so the gods must have human shape, it breaks down. So each of these three arguments, look at, we all agree that the gods are in human form. No, we don't. Human form is the most beautiful Well, every creature would say that. And what is, if the divine form is really the most beautiful, how can we tell them apart? And then only human beings can actually be rational, and presumably gods are too, so gods must look like us. Well, that doesn't follow at all. Now, does it? And if we assume that it does, we wind up in absurdity. So this is a whole set of arguments provided by the skeptic against the Epicurean position, which argues that God must have a human form. Do the Epicureans really have to be committed to this? Probably not. But in fact, they do seem to have, historically, taken up that sort of position. So this is an attack on that, a set of criticisms of anthropomorphism in the Epicurean position.